Okay, everybody, welcome. My name is Mark Burbeck. I'm one of the founders of the Our Fight campaign, and we're very pleased to welcome you here this evening. This is our first public meeting, which we're putting on jointly with the British Friends of Israel. There are people in another room elsewhere to give you an indication of the interest and popularity of this session, and there's a few hundred people online watching this. Well, I hope they are. I got a lot of messages today, where is the link, things like that, but hopefully they're watching. And this is what you guys have done this last year. And I think you should give yourselves a massive round of applause. Because if you think back to October the 7th, the pogrom, the news that was coming out during the course of the day, I know there are people in this room who had family or friends murdered on that day. There are people who are close to people who are still hostages there. So that period on October the 7th must have felt very angry, very lonely. October the 9th, a number of people went to a vigil at Downing Street. And this is where our campaign, Our Fight, starts to germinate, because a number of us went to that vigil opposite Downing Street, and we noticed that the only people there were Jews, were Israelis, young people hugging each other, mourning, worrying, news still coming out, as I said. On the same evening as well, there were people dancing outside the Israeli embassy. And so you had these two sides of Britain's response, really. On the one hand, this kind of lack of empathy, which was really striking, the fact that people weren't putting an arm around the shoulder of our Jewish and Israeli friends and comforting them. And in fact, worse than that, outside the Israeli embassy, you had people celebrating the pogrom that had taken place. So it must have felt like a very lonely time around that period. And then as the weeks went by, these celebrations that were happening outside the Israeli embassy turned into marches, big marches through the city, organized by people like the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, characters like Jeremy Corbyn addressing those marches. And it must have felt like a very odd time, the fact that there was no sympathy, and people were starting to talk about whether they should be openly Jewish, whether they should display their Magen David, or whether their children should hide their school badges on the tube. And if you remember back around that time, people were organizing vigils in Parliament Square, in Trafalgar Square. You'll see some of the photos up here. And the response was probably the first change, I think, really, was the campaign against anti-Semitism when they organized the big march. And I think people actually felt like, okay, let's get out there. Maybe it's time to make our presence felt, take a stand, try and encourage support from other people, from the wider community. And then following that, a few months later, you then start to get the sort of Hamas terrorist kind of movement emerging. And in fact, after vigils and that march, you then get the counter-protests. And it's funny that on the same day, you wait, and then three come along at once kind of thing. And on the same day, you had Itai, who organized the Stop the Hate, or Enough is Enough, as they were called at the time. They had a counter-protest against one of the big marches. Our group, yeah. Our group, we only just vaguely knew each other at that time. So our group, Our Fight, we sort of spontaneously, we were actually heading to the Enough is Enough protest, and we decided to get ourselves in amongst it in the march. And there's a few people here, James, Wendy, Brige, Stuart, Sue, people who were there right at the beginning, right in amongst it in some of these large marches with their little handwritten signs saying Hamas are terrorists. But all of that was eclipsed, as you probably remember, by one man, Nihat Gorbani, who he thought... Perfect timing. He didn't need a group like Itai behind the barriers, or he didn't need 6 or 7 friends with handwritten signs. He was there on his own with his own handwritten sign. And I think that's one of the big messages of this last year, is that it doesn't take many people to start to change the narrative. And Nihat, I think you can honestly say, has created a movement. His willingness to stand up and press the police, hold them to account on the law, and to press the marches, and with his simple statement that Hamas are terrorists. And as you know, lots of other people have then followed that approach and coordinated that. So that's the year as it progressed, and then I think you see more and more people get more and more confident. People, wherever there is a march, wherever there is a protest, whether it's Swiss Cottage, whether it was the Phoenix Cinema, which also deserves a round of applause. I hope there's people who were involved in that. I know people constantly refer to that as one of the best days ever. And if you weren't there, then ask people who were, because it was an amazing experience. So wherever there is a protest, and wherever there is a march, or even outside the Royal Courts of Justice, as you see here, wherever there is this assertion that somehow there is a genocide going on in Gaza, that the politics of the Holocaust now should be rewritten, wherever there are these campaigns to stop selling arms to Israel, you'll find that there's a group somewhere. There'll be, whether it's Our Fight, whether it's Stop the Hate, whether it's the British Friends of Israel, there'll be a group somewhere who has decided to take a stand. So I think this is a kind of, this meeting, this event, is sort of a celebration and an acknowledgement of all the great things that everybody has done. Lots of people in this room have been involved in them, and there'll be lots of people who couldn't make it tonight who were also involved. But I think what we also want to do tonight is take stock and think about how we can start to win support more broadly in society. And I think the big issue for us is, how do we convince non-Jews that anti-Semitism and this struggle in support of Israel is something that they should be concerned about. And so to help us with that, we have 2 excellent speakers. The first speaker who I'll bring out is Allison Pearson. She probably needs no introduction. I'm hoping that the tech works and she knows that she's not just like, checking her email in there, but she knows that she's about to come out. Allison, so a slide came up there earlier, you'll have seen from a year ago, by the statue of Churchill. And I don't know if you remember, but Allison put out a call in one of her columns, and she said, I'm going to be there defending the statue. And it was on the same day as there was a large Palestine solidarity campaign. Talk of the devil. Come here. Brilliant. Thank you. You're going. Thank you. So there was a Palestine Solidarity Campaign march on that day, and one of the issues, obviously, that we're talking about is the differing attitudes amongst people towards things like Churchill, towards Remembrance Day, free speech, those kinds of issues. So she put out a call in the paper saying that she was going to be there defending Churchill. So we decided to go along, and a number of other people went along. And I think this is a trend that I think we're going to see more of, actually, which is that the journalist comes down to street level. It's great. We love all the podcasters that we all listen to, and we're all swapping podcasts all the time. But I think increasingly we're going to see people like Allison sort of, she'll explain exactly what's happened to her, but having these kinds of involvements where their passion gets the better of them, maybe, and out they come. Another example, actually, I was going to mention is Josh Howie is here. He's he got us out on a counter protest the other day, first thing in the morning, protesting against Francesca Albanese. So yeah, I think we're going to see more of this. I hope we see more of this. I hope we see more of people who have positions where they can say something important, but they're also able to get down and do the sort of street level stuff. So Allison will be speaking shortly, and then our other speaker is Mick Hume, who
Welcome and wine. Act is supposed to come on first and then the starter, right?
Yeah. You're right there.
Thank you. Yeah.
He's only a little bit older than me. So Mick is, again, I think this mix, this combination of sort of writing and speaking and then actually being involved in campaigning. So he, as you may remember or not, he set up the magazine Living Marxism. And then after that, he founded Spiked Online, which I know a lot of people, all the time, I meet people who are reading Spiked, very influential. And he basically set up their politics. The stamp, the uniqueness of Spiked, I think, is completely down to Mick Hume. So I'm really pleased. He also, should we tell everybody that you also advised on Brexit and the Reform Party, which I think he's a consultant, speechwriter. Okay, so these are our two speakers. Very much looking forward to hearing from them. Okay, so Allison.
Oh, I'm going to go first.
Is that all right?
Yeah, okay. Can I have
want me to go first?
Can I have a hand? No, I'll go first. I'll go first. Hang on.
We don't want it to be too slick.
Not much chance of that. Good evening, everyone. I was going to begin by saying it's wonderful to see so many of you who are prepared to risk your reputation by sharing a room with a non-crime hate criminal. But I now appear to be a non-crime, non-hate, non-criminal. So, yes. More of that anon. You may have read, of course, that on the morning of Remembrance Sunday, two unwary police officers came to my house and told me I was the subject of an investigation because I'd posted something on social media a year ago. The police said they weren't allowed to tell me what the offensive thing I'd said was, although the allegation was stirring up racial hatred. Now, obviously, I have been deeply shocked and upset because I thought I'd spent the past 13 months fighting racial hatred called anti-Semitism. Seeing headlines saying Pearson's hate tweets isn't nice, but I realised when I was coming here that being accosted by the police is now basically a must-have for any self-respecting campaigner against anti-Semitism. Finally, I can look Gideon Falter, Mark Burbeck, and Nayat Ghorbrani in the eye. I have to say my only regret is if I should have had a Hamas is terrorist poster in my front window, and then I could have chalked up an arrest as well. You could almost feel sorry for Hamas, can't you? I mean, there they are, doing their best to be among the most repugnant, horrifying, blood-curdling, merciless barbarians ever to walk the face of this earth. And still, despite these enormous efforts, mass slaughter of young festival goers, mowing down pensioners at a bus stop, executing parents in front of their children, still there are senior managers in the BBC who won't call Hamas terrorists. I mean, how unfair is that? Shame. I don't know about you, but I've made so many complaints to the BBC about their coverage of Gaza that I'm confident of getting a Christmas card from the complaints department. You know, I had a feeling that the police were investigating until about an hour and a half ago, which had caused such offence to an anonymous person in Brighton, was probably posted in the aftermath of the 7th of October 2023. Back then, like a lot of you, I expect, I was raging at the indecent haste with which Western opinion had moved on from sympathy for Israel in her unbearable anguish at the worst mass murder of Jews since the Holocaust. My beloved Jewish friend in New York, Sharon, forwarded me a video recorded by Hamas at one kibbutz. A family, I think it was a family, it was very hard to tell amidst the blood and the gore, were either dead or dying on their living room floor when what appeared to be the father, again very hard to tell, groaned and flung out an arm, possibly to reach his child who lay next to him. One of the monsters that the BBC won't call terrorist unleashed a volley of bullets to finish him off. The word that came to my mind seeing that video was abattoir, except which one of us has ever seen an abattoir for human beings? So I couldn't forget that scene of carnage, nor the rapturous ecstasy with which Hamas had gone about their task. But everywhere you looked on the news, there were calls for Israel to exercise restraint, for Israel to make a proportionate response. What is the proportionate response to 1,200 of your beloved men, women, and children being slaughtered in their homes, in their cars, in the woods, and in the skips where they cowered, hearing the sounds of their friends being raped and shot? What is the proportionate response to grandmothers and babies being taken by force into enemy territory, to the half-naked, cruelly twisted body of a young woman, her name was Shani Luke, being slung on the back of a truck and spat at as she was paraded before people in Gaza? In Act 5 of Hamlet, Laertes returns to Denmark to discover that his beloved sister Ophelia is dead, either by drowning or by her own hand. A priest explains that under the circumstances, he can't offer Ophelia a proper Christian burial. Laertes leaps into the grave and lifts up his sister's body, crying out in his anger and his sorrow. What ceremony else? What ceremony else? As human beings, we all know what is owing to the innocent victims of terrorism, don't we? But not to Israeli victims of terrorism, apparently, not to the Jews who lost their lives on the 7th of October. They were to be swiftly and conveniently forgotten as the Israel as colonialist aggressor narrative went into full swing. You know, I swear that the British media, apart from the Telegraph and a few others, got more exercised about electricity being cut off in Gaza than heads being cut off in Kibbutz Be'eri. In the fortnight after the 7th of October, as Mark described, I was Laertes, dumbfounded at the profound lack of empathy and respect for Israel and her shell-shocked population. Unbelievably, here in the UK, anti-Semitic attacks were surging. The Community Security Trust recorded at least 533 attacks on Jews between the 7th and the 20th of October, a 651% increase on that period from the year before. One morning, I got a WhatsApp from my friend, the author Laura Dodsworth. "I feel so helpless," Laura wrote. "Is there anything we can do?" Well, what we decided to do is to set up the British Friends of Israel, a small group of us, Laura, me, Toby Young, the great journalist and founder of the Free Speech Union, Jan McVarish, amazing campaigner here tonight. I was going to call her a partner in crime to Mark, but she's a partner in virtue to Mark. Yeah. The barrister Francis Hoare, tech wizard Ian Rons, broadcaster and academic Emma Webb, and Toby Guys, who volunteered brilliantly to do our PR. Looking back, none of us, we didn't have a conversation about why we were doing it. We just felt something needed to be done, if only to provide a focus for all those people in the UK who deplored the unfair way Israel was being depicted and indeed hated the way that pro-Palestine had occupied our streets. Laura and Toby drafted what we called the October Declaration. On behalf of concerned British citizens, it said, "We stand with British Jews and we condemn all forms of anti-Semitism. We unequivocally condemn all acts of terrorism against civilians in Israel. We demand that Hamas be referred to as terrorists, and we assert the right of Israel to defend herself." Now, the whole group hit the phones. We were asking well-known names to sign the declaration, get the ball rolling. We soon had senior members of parliament, the armed forces, professors, lawyers. I have to say, with a sinking heart, it was a lot harder to persuade people in the arts and on the left in general to sign. Mick may explain why that should be to us shortly. We were delighted that Tom Stoppard, I believe our greatest living writer, not only signed the October Declaration, but released a powerful statement of his own. Stoppard said, "Who can say where Israel's response on October the 7th will sit in the calculus of suffering by the time the region subsides into the next configuration of uneasy neighbours?" We are aware that Jews are not the only victims of this tragedy. Hamas knew that there would be consequences to the 7th of October, but the consequences did not weigh with Hamas. Before we take up a position on what's happening now, we should consider whether this is a fight over territory or a struggle between civilization and barbarism. Over the past 13 months, many of us here tonight have suffered attacks for our defense of Israel, and of course, we have all had to reckon with the appalling loss of Palestinian life as the IDF has faced the impossible task of fighting a war against an enemy that chooses to hide behind civilians. One military expert summed up Hamas's strategy in 2 chilling words: human sacrifice. But you know what I've never forgotten? Stoppard's stirring words. Never stop believing that Israel is absolutely on the front line in that struggle between civilization and barbarism. We know the radical Islamists have often boasted, "We love death and you love life." As Merev, the mother of a 24-year-old hostage, Romi Gonan, told me recently in Israel, it's not just anti-Semitism, Allison. They hate freedom. Faced with such a warped, nihilistic creed that would throw small children onto a bonfire, what choice do people have but to take up arms and defeat it? This is not always a popular view in the West, I don't have to tell you that, particularly among the young who had been taught to see the only democracy in the Middle East, a haven of women's equality and gay rights, as a white colonialist oppressor. I know that even within Jewish families here, Israel has the ability to set the generations at loggerheads. Concerns about Islamophobia, we'll talk about that in the police later, seeded in progressive minds by activists bankrolled by the Iranian Republic, may be part of it. One wit put it brilliantly, I thought, on social media. Israel is fighting to save Western civilization before Western civilization can stop it. Brilliant. Now, at this point, as Mark says, over a year later, I suppose you could say that Israel has won the ground war, but lost the propaganda war. Israel could have chosen to share the very worst footage from 7th of October, the likes of which most people could never imagine. But Israel chose not to, out of respect for the families of the dead, of course, but also because there was undeniably a sense of shame. A proud nation with a famous army and intelligence services had allowed its young women to be raped, had failed catastrophically to protect its citizens on that terrible day. Hamas, of course, has no such compunction. Wherever possible, the jihadists have invited the media to gawp at distressing events in Gaza, both real and staged, brazenly appropriating any sympathy that might otherwise have properly belonged to the Jews. So, just to say, to mark the first anniversary of the 7th of October, I decided to push back a bit against the narrative. I went to Israel, and thanks to the organisational brilliance of Richard Pater of BICOM, I was able to interview scores of Israelis, survivors, soldiers, politicians, bereaved parents, mothers of hostages, and just regular people who had to step up for their nation on that darkest day. Let me tell you, as a journalist, when you're reporting a disturbing story, you usually try to shield your audience. You choose words that will cushion the horror. I took the deliberate decision to let Telegraph readers have every last harrowing detail. Were such shock tactics really necessary? Well, it seemed that they were, because on the BBC News around the anniversary, Hamas's deputy leader told international editor Jeremy Bowen that Hamas, yeah, I know, what a nice pair they made. Hamas, said the leader, didn't set out to kill any Israeli women or children on the 7th of October. Good heavens, no. Hamas's resistance fighters were ordered only to kill occupation fighters, although he did concede that there were certainly personal mistakes, and the fighters who had just popped into family homes on kibbutzes to have a chat and a bite to eat may have felt they were in danger. Yeah, well, I've been to those kibbutzes. That's not quite what it looked like. You know what? On the upside, I met the most exceptional people in Israel. Shari Mendes, an architect, was an IDF volunteer on the 7th of October, part of a small all-female unit which would take care of the bodies of the women victims. My first shift was Sunday morning, Shari recalled. It was unimaginable. Body bags stacked one on top of each other right up the walls, hundreds of bodies. The smell was incomprehensible. I don't even know how to describe it. The smell was so bad, literally gasping, struggling to breathe. There was blood on the floor, so much blood. It was like walking into horror. Our team did their best to take off their jewellery. Sometimes it was very difficult. These young women had nose rings and their faces were completely smashed in. I'm working with a dentist there trying to take off a nose ring, and there's nothing left of her face but the nose. Shari said the women were shot many times in the head. Why? Why? We saw that these women were shot to be killed, maybe in the heart, in the head, but then they were shot many times in the face, and it looked like systematic mutilation, because it seemed like they wanted to ruin these women's faces. We got notified a woman's coming in and she has no legs, so the terrorists cut off her legs. There was clearly immense sadistic violence. Many were shot in the breast and the crotch. A lot of the women had bloody stained underwear, Shari said. Some had no underwear at all. I asked Shari Mendes as my final question, of all the young women whose bodies you took care of, Shari, and prepared for burial, how many were in a fit state to be showed to their mother and father? None, Shari said. Not one girl could we show to her parents. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is barbarism. Lest we ever forget, that is what our fight is against. The mutilated, annihilated bodies of scores of young women. And civilization was present too in that place, in the form of Shari and every woman and man who showed love and tenderness to those poor lost girls on the slab. At the United Nations, Shari Mendes gave a remarkable speech about her experience. You can look it up, you can Google it. But the UN, especially the Women's Committee, was shamefully slow to investigate the sexual violence against Israeli women, as they coined the phrase, "Me too, unless you're a Jew." One night in Jerusalem, I had dinner with 3 charming and remarkably mature young IDF soldiers. Roy is Special Forces, going undercover into Arab areas. He's a handsome, bearded 29-year-old, but his eyes have seen 100 years of tragedy. What eyes? Roy told me that in his spare time, he's doing a philosophy degree. I asked why, and the soldier said he was trying to get his head round the problem of evil. Roy told me he'd recently gone into tunnels under Gaza and found cages embedded in the concrete walls barely big enough for a dog. Cages where Israeli hostages had been held and where over 100 human beings, we hope they're still alive, may still be held an intolerable year after they were abducted. And there was Roy, this amazing guy, when he wasn't in danger, when he wasn't trying to extract the devils from their tunnels, was reading Hume and Locke and Hobbes's Leviathan to try and understand this insane evil that it is Israel's sad and solemn duty to try and root out. We in the West, we don't have to wrestle with the problem of evil anymore. We have the luxury of pretending that evil just went away by itself, not like Roy and the other soldiers who would rather be getting on with their young lives than fighting, not like Shari and her team of middle-aged mums and grandmas treating those murdered girls with loving care, not like Mandy Damari and all the other hostage relatives praying their children and husbands and wives and fathers and mothers will come home from Gaza, not like Nimrod Palmak, an extraordinary guy I met, former Special Forces, now running a non-profit for Arab-Israeli reconciliation amongst young people. Nimrod defied orders that terrible day to drive south using any weapon he could pick up. He told me that he didn't come across a living person until 7:30 at night. At one crossroads, he was stunned to find the bodies of 15 youngsters lying on the road in party clothes. He had no idea about the nearby Nova Festival. What was Nimrod's biggest lesson from the 7th of October? I asked him. I saw what happens to the Jews when they don't have an army, he said. We had a wonderful reaction to the British Friends of Israel. This email from Ariel is quite typical. It's inspiring and heartwarming to know that genuinely good people still exist, said Ariel, and have not been swayed by the consistent anti-Israel reporting. Although I grew up in London, I moved to Israel 5 years ago, and I'm writing to you from my flat in the south, which I have only left for essentials in the last week. To know that Israel has global supporters makes the heartache, anguish, and anxiety of the last week that little bit more bearable. I'm sure you are receiving a fair amount of pushback, and it would be much easier and safer to be indifferent or silent. But I cannot tell you how much the Jewish community worldwide appreciates your help. Thank you again. Jews tell us that they are grateful to the British Friends of Israel. No. That's the wrong way around. We are grateful to you. We are grateful that Israel is giving the flower of her youth out there. The flower of Israel's youth putting their life on the line, beating back monsters who despise everything we stand for, who would undo every single freedom, every human right we have been privileged to have since the Enlightenment. The trouble is, we no longer know we're privileged in this country, as those who fight have to know. In Kibbutz Kfar Azar, early in the morning of 7th of October, Hamas came through the nearby boundary fence and straight into the youth quarter. It's a really heavenly, leafy place. Beautiful on the day I visited. But empty, of course, now, just ghosts. The young adults went to live in that quarter to get away from their parents, to chill and hang out. They'd created a beautiful chill-out zone with lovely hanging and vines. Emily Damari and the twins, Gali and Ziv, who were then 27 years old, all three of them now a year older, God knows where, were taken hostage. All of the other young people in that youth quarter were murdered, their lovely small apartments destroyed by grenades, set on fire, the walls riddled with bullet marks. Walking among the ashes and the debris of life a few weeks ago, I came across the corner apartment where Sivan, a young woman and her boyfriend, were murdered. Sivan's mother has turned the remains of her daughter's home into an art installation. There are photos from her childhood, a book to leave your condolences. I held my pen over the book for a long time. What the hell do you write? There is a fragment from Sivan's lovely, pretty, sparkly coffee table just completely destroyed. I bent down to pick up a bit. A remnant of the civilization that existed on that kibbutz before the barbarians came calling. I keep that shard of Sivan's coffee table in my bag, and sometimes I run my finger along its sharp edges, and I think of that beautiful, dead young woman. What ceremony else? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison. That was incredible. I know there's a lot of people who are directly affected.
I get a bit emotional, but then we can be excused for getting emotional. It's an emotional topic, isn't it?
I think people welcome it. I think having that passion and that understanding and the empathy that we're saying is so lacking. Okay, Mick. I'd like to
follow that, as they say. Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to thank Our Fight and the British Friends of Israel for putting on this fantastic event and inviting me to have the privilege to speak. Mark asked me to talk a bit about why people and how we should appeal to people like me, who don't have any particular connection with Judaism or with Israel, as to why this is the most important issue of our age and how we can talk to them about persuading them. So I may be preaching to the choir here, but a few things that I've been arguing with people about since October the 7th. Let's turn it around to begin with. Why do so many people in the West hate Israel? Why does this come from the top down of our society? We're not only talking about the vitriolic anti-Semitism we've seen on the streets of London. We are talking about, from the top down of Western society, a singling out of Israel as the criminal state in world affairs. Today, the elected, democratically elected Prime Minister of Israel has a warrant issued by the International Criminal Court against him as a war criminal, as a criminal against human rights. And by the UK, and supported by the UK, and warning that if he comes to the UK, he could be arrested. The elected Prime Minister of the democratic state of Israel is apparently the standout worst leader in international affairs. I'm not going to go through the long list of all those we might think are contenders. Of course, the International Criminal Court is a very balanced, fair-minded organisation. And so they also named the Hamas leader as being... I thought they might have left a blank space, fill in here who the leader is this week, because as we know, Hamas leaders tend to have a fairly short career as things are moving on. The United Nations Special Rapporteur, a very evil woman, if ever you look at her writings and speeches, says that the United Nations should banish Israel, should exclude it from international affairs altogether. It should be the prior state of international affairs. And by the way, if you look at the United Nations General Assembly votes on Israel and Gaza, that's not far short of being what the position is. There are a handful of states voting against the anti-Israeli motions at the United Nations. Only the United States vetoed the United Nations Security Council motion this week that the occupation of the territories was a crime against humanity, etc. All other 14 members of the United Nations Security Council, including Britain, voted for it. I spend a lot of time in Brussels working, and there's a guy there called Josep Borrell, who's the head of foreign affairs. The most evil anti-Israeli figure in European politics, who has been trying to get the European states this week to stop talking to Israel, send Israel to Coventry, cut off diplomatic relations with the Israelis because they are beyond the pale of international politics. There are still decent voices in Europe, so that didn't get through, but nevertheless there's a powerful sentiment in that direction. And states like our neighbours in Ireland are vociferously anti-Israeli and want the state of Palestine recognised immediately. So Israel is singled out in this way, as a pariah state, as a force of evil in the world. And the protests are against it. None of the Islamic regimes suffer this kind of attention. The Chinese persecution of their Islamic Muslim minority, silence. Nobody cares about any of that. It's only when it's Israel that it's a problem. Why should that be? Well, there is a clue in that Israel is the world's only Jewish state. That might be a clue that someone might draw some conclusions from if they were cynically minded. We know that there's a powerful body of Islamist anti-Semitism abroad in the world. But why do so many on the liberal left, particularly the liberal left elites in Western society, excuse them, support them, apologise for them? Why are they in denial about the atrocities that Allison was just talking about that happened on October the 7th? Why, when there is a Jew hunt in Amsterdam, do the left, in the heart of liberal civilised Europe, apparently, why, when there's a Jew hunt on the streets of Amsterdam, do the European left come out and say, who will think that Allison's committed a hate crime for putting a tweet out, chasing Jews and beating them through the streets of Amsterdam? That's not a hate crime, that's just football. We don't want to talk about that. That's not politics. Why are there so many that are prepared to apologise in this way? Why is it that if an innocent man holds a placard in a London street saying that Hamas are terrorists, which many of us might think might have mistakenly thought that was the British law and the British government's policy, can be arrested and dragged off the streets while the hate mongers are allowed to carry on unmolested? Hamas are terrorists. Come along with me, sir. Some of us are old enough and stupid enough to think that that is about as controversial as holding a placard that said Jimmy Savile was a wrong 'un. But apparently, because it's about Israel, Hamas and Jews, it's an arrestable offence. So there's clearly something more than the oldest hatred at play here. Because Israel is not only the only Jewish state on earth, it is also the only Western-style democracy in the Middle East. It is the only state in the world now fighting tooth and nail to defend democracy and national sovereignty and the standards of Western civilization that we all grew up with and depend upon. And those are the standards which the Western elites have abandoned. And they hate Israel for showing them what it means. Everything that they've rejected, Israel stands for and fights for. And they find that unacceptably offensive. You mentioned the protests at the last year at the Cenotaph when the football lads were there. I don't mind the football lads. I'm a bit of a football lad myself. You might not want to have them to your house for dinner, but generally speaking, they're good people to be on the same side as. In their Cenotaph protest, they had a banner. One of them had a banner. A homemade banner written on a bedsheet is always better than the ones produced by the Socialist Workers' Party in their print. Always much more entertaining and interesting. He had a banner that held it up there behind the Cenotaph that said, "It's not pro-Palestinian, it's anti-British." And I thought that was a rather neat encapsulation of what's going on with this, the support for these protests in high places. It's a rejection of the kind of foundations of our British and Western politics and society. So that's why we have to support Israel, because we recognise that what's at stake there. Because it's becoming clear that Israel, with its remarkable military successes over the last year and a half, against extraordinary odds, remarkable military successes. Given a free hand, the Israelis can deal with their enemies in the Middle East. It's their friends in the West they've got to worry about. And that's where we come in. That's why one of the things I write these days is I write a column for a website called the European Conservative, called Democracy Watch. And when we launched that in 2023, we thought it was going to be about the anti-democratic tendency of the European Commission, rule of law issues, Hungary and Poland, Spain, the usual kind of EU politics, which it is. But immediately it became clear there were two other issues which we were going to write about that were dominating the issue of democracy in Europe. One was the farmers, which have now reached our blighted shores, the farmer protests against the madness of net zero and the democratic revolt in support of the farmers, and the other one was Israel. The war in Gaza had become the front line of the struggle for democracy in the world, and the European elite's abandonment of Israel was the clearest sign that democracy was at risk in Europe itself. Of course, you have to excuse me, I have a first. Of course, the liberal political and media elites in the West don't hate all Jews. They only fear and loathe Jews who stand up and fight back, speak out for themselves. There's an old joke you'll all have heard many times of beloved late, great Jewish comedians like Jackie Mason used to tell, which I used in some of my early writings after October the 7th to show the kind of Jews that the Western elites like. Two elderly Jews are standing in front of a Nazi. You've all heard this 100 times, but I'll tell it again. I can't do the accent, so I won't try. Two elderly Jews are standing in front of a Nazi execution squad. One of them says, "Do your worst, you Nazi bastards. Long live the Jewish homeland." And the other one says, "Shh, don't make trouble." That's the kind of caricature of the Jews that the West likes. Don't make trouble. October the 7th, don't make trouble. Don't go bombing and killing the people responsible for it. Ceasefire. Ceasefire now. They called for a ceasefire even before Israel had done anything. Ceasefire, translation, surrender. Take the knee, lie down. Because you're fighting against people in Hamas who made it clear, their leader made clear, they will repeat October the 7th when they had the opportunity again and again and again. You don't have to make it up, it's there. That's their declaration of intent. So ceasefire meant from the start surrender. And the pressure they've put on Israel to surrender has been, we have been bombarded with this since October the 7th, this kind of upside-down view of what's going on in Gaza and the Middle East. That attitude from the BBC and everybody and all the rest of their kind of cohorts in the mainstream media of blame Israel first and ask questions later. That's the kind of standard of journalism that we see in relation to anything that happens in that conflict these days. Turn the truth upside down. We're faced with what really is kind of Gaza through the looking glass. Israel, the force fighting against genocidal, anti-Semitic death cults in the Middle East, is the force accused of genocide. As I say, Gaza through the looking glass. Israel is the force committing war crimes against civilians. If you read the people who actually know about this stuff, a brilliant article in Newsweek earlier this year by one of the top West Point American military strategies. He said that Israel had set a new standard for not killing civilians in these kind of urban warfare. That it's quite remarkable the lengths that they've gone to avoid civilian casualties. Warning people to evacuate areas. Have you ever heard of that in a war in the last 20 in Iraq or Afghanistan? Warning people to evacuate areas before your troops or air forces attack. Going out of their way to try and limit the numbers of... so that even by Hamas's distorted figures, the ratio between civilian and military deaths is quite remarkably low compared to normal, I say normal, Afghanistan, Iraq, these kind of horror stories. Of course there are civilian casualties, far too many, but every one of them, and I was very pleased to hear the new American Secretary of State making this point, every one of them is down to Hamas. Every one of them is down to Hamas. Using their people as human shields. But in this Gaza, through the looking glass world that we're expected to believe, Israel is always the villain. But no, what Israel is really guilty of in their eyes, not only being the only Jewish state on earth, but being the only Western-style democracy in the Middle East that stands up for what the West itself has abandoned, for national sovereignty, for democracy, for freedom. They have a government that knows that a woman can't have a penis, but that she can have a gun and defend her rights and her liberty in a war against Islamic barbarism. And that's why I think Israel has become this focus for this unholy alliance of Islamist hatred plus the self-loathing of these kind of Western liberal elites who hate our society, our civilization, and our history. It's the kind of thing summed up and often pointed to by that group, Queers for Palestine. Or as a gay friend of mine calls them, homosexuals for Hamas. Often been compared to, the Turkeys for Christmas movement. But these are globalists who hate national democracy and sovereignty and actually have more in common with those who support a global caliphate than they do with those who are fighting tooth and nail to defend their people and their borders against this kind of threat. I'm very grateful to Allison, not only for everything she talked about tonight, but for bringing our attention after October the 7th to the Tom Stoppard point. It was only through Allison that I actually came across the great playwright's words when he talked about this being not about territory, but a struggle between civilization and barbarism. I've used that many times since the 7th of October. Benjamin Netanyahu made an equally acute point at the beginning of this year when he said, this is a battle not only of Israel against those barbarians, it's a battle of civilization against barbarism. In other words, it's not just that Hamas and Hezbollah are genuinely a barbaric death cult, but they are in the forefront of a wider threat to all that we hold dear. That's why this meeting is called that we're on the precipice of darkness. So we support Israel. We should support Israel, not out of sympathy or some kind of feeling of solidarity with those who are suffering, although that's all, I'm not trying to belittle that as a sentiment, but because they're in the front line of a struggle that affects us all. And we shouldn't be put off by any slurs and name-calling about it being far right to hate Hamas these days. And Israel also, and I'll finish on this, is really an inspiration. Should really be an inspiration to all of us. Because if you think what a moment of darkness that was after October the 7th, and even, Israel's most fervent supporters feared the worst after that attack, and the global celebrations of it that took place, even in Western capitals. Now, I think we can see Israel's message to the world is let there be light. We can win. If we stand up and fight for what we believe in, we can win against all the odds. So Israel's war is not simply a defense of democracy. It is, for me, democracy in action. It demonstrates that when you have popular support for a cause, which they do, despite the Western media only ever showing us people protesting against the Israeli government on various issues, and the hostage families are used very badly, I think, in that. But we do know that public opinion in Israel is on the side. Whatever they think of Netanyahu in the next election, that's neither here nor there. They support the government and they support overwhelmingly the Israeli Defense Forces in that struggle. It is democracy in action. It shows you that when you have a people engaged in a cause, who have a stake in their society, who want to fight for it, anything becomes possible. And that connection between democracy and winning wars goes right back to the ancient Athenians when the poor sailors of Athens defeated the Persian Empire at the Battle of Salamis 2,500 years ago. It is democracy in action and something we should look up to for inspiration. Netanyahu told the United Nations that we had to choose, in the words of the prophets, as he put it, whether we were going to leave the future generations a blessing or a curse. A blessing of an Israel democratic-influenced democratic Middle East, or the curse of a Middle East dominated by the Islamic Republic of Iran and its terrorist satellites. And I'm with him on that. It's also mentioned the book of Isaiah, where God said to the prophet that Israel would not only be a promised land, but also a light to the Gentiles. Now, I'm an old Western atheist, not normally leaning on scriptures or prophets' words to predict the future or influence the present. But I think even those of us in the West who are non-believers have got to see Israel today as a blessing to the West in its hour of darkness. Let there be light, more power to their elbows.
Fabulous. Thank you, Mick. Thank you very much to both of you. Yes, very moving. So, Allison, you said that you purposefully chose some of the most powerful stories in your writing. I mean, what's been the response that you've had from people? Has it led to any eyes being opened or scales falling? Or?
I don't know how many read it was published in the Telegraph. It was the really big reporting piece talking to Shari and, one of the mothers of the hostages, and Emily Cohen, who's here, took me to what I called the Heartbreak Hotel. It's a place where the survivors of Kibbutz Kafars are living. And Emily gave me a warning before I went into the loo. She said, pretty much everyone who'll be standing next to you at the basin might have been widowed or lost a child or will have lost someone. Everyone there has lost someone. It's what Mick's talking about, Mark, isn't it? You want to cut through this. For those of us who are on this side of the argument, it's just maddening. You just think, look at these people, what they've done, the suffering, the fact that we laugh about Queers for Palestine, but how did young Western people come to be colonized, to be on the side of their sworn enemy? We don't see, as I said in my talk, we don't seem to be able to identify evil. We can't even pick out our own enemies. So I suppose it was wanting, with those pieces, to try and cut through. I don't think anyone who could read those 9,000 words published in the Telegraph, I kind of challenge anyone to read them and think, oh, these seem like a great bunch of guys, have them round for dinner. And I think they were widely shared. I did hear a lot of people saying it was absolutely shattering, and it was meant to be shattering because you the obduracy with it. I don't know if Mick feels this. Sometimes you don't know what to do about the to me, it just seems completely crazy. And as we're talking about today, this, the mad, Gaza through the looking glass, as Mick says, of let's arraign Netanyahu for his terrible crimes. Meanwhile, Mr. Putin, hasn't he done something recently? And we know, if we go back, and I went actually a few months ago, I went back and looked at the photos of Mosul and Raqqa when the Allies were going in there. They look exactly the same as Gaza looks today. I can't remember anyone ever sort of, piping up about civilian casualties. So you're really up against it, defending Israel. But the young people I met there made me hopeful. I think it's an astounding country. It really is. And compared to our own young who are flailing around with mental health issues and so on, they have no choice. They don't have a choice. When I had the dinner with the young IDF soldiers, and one didn't like the Netanyahu, and Roy, the Special Forces guy, said to me, I said, are you ever afraid? He said he was only afraid when there were protests against the judicial changes, because he said as long as Israel is strong and facing out, we'll be okay. He said if we start falling apart internally. I wish I had an answer, Mark. I wish, we just keep trying. And I hope going forward we can pull back, and as Mick's made the case brilliantly, make this now to be seen as these people are defending these very, very precious values. But as you say, as Mick says, we have an absolutely sappy, hopeless liberal elite which has given up on many of the values, the freedoms which people fought for, scandalously abandoned, and we see Israel, socking it to them. So I wish I had an answer, but I just came away from Israel weirdly positive. I just thought that they're going to prevail. I know we're not supposed to cheer when they blew up all the pages, but wasn't it great? So good.
I ordered a comedy pager suit. But they started arresting people on the protests for making the joke. It was apparently racist to make a joke about the pages going off in the pockets. But the barbarism that you talk about in the stories, and the Hamas, I mean, not wishing to talk about Niak again, because it'll go to his head, but I think what is great about the story that you describe of holding the poster is it just very simply doesn't allow them to take Hamas out of the story. So they can march through the streets, they can shout about all the things, they can say Israel is committing genocide and all the things, but then you turn up and you say Hamas are terrorists, and it's very simple, and it puts all the stories that you've described straight back into the frame.
And also, let's think, what are we seeing at the moment? Who are some of the bravest people on earth, apart from those IDF people, are the women in Iran, right? Okay, astonishing.
Yeah.
And I think my favourite picture of the year was 3 Israeli amazing knockout young women who were flying the aircraft to go and bomb Iran, and I thought that's the way you show them. That's amazing. They're going there, they're helping the young women on the ground who are taking their clothes off to try and show their absolute disdain and disgust for these repressive regime. I think it's really important, actually. I think that there are so many, I will bear this out, there are so many Iranians, there are so many people in the Middle East. I was talking to a guy the other day who comes from a Muslim family. He said his mother said years ago in Algeria, these horrendous people are ruining our religion. We don't want any of this stuff. There are plenty of peaceful people who want to live. They want to raise their children nicely, and then you have this, as Mick said, death cult, and they are enemies of everybody.
Thank you. So, Mick, would you go so far as to say that we can't save democracy and civilization unless we take sides with Israel? Not just an inspiration, like Allison said, and you're saying that the light, but is it?
Oh no, it's complete. Yes, absolutely. It's absolutely crucial. I mean, this is the front line. So what are you going to say? Well, we don't worry about. we'll give up with the front line, but we'll do some good tweeting or something. I mean, that isn't actually the way the real world works, you know.
Don't make any jokes about tweets, mate.
No. So, but some tweets are really important.
Some tweets are really important, yeah.
No, I think you absolutely got to understand that. That because it's become this focus for, it's like everything that's rotten in our Western society and politics has coalesced against Israel. Everything that's corrupt, everything that's decadent, everything that's rotten and dying about it has kind of coalesced around it. And so we have to take sides on that, and we have to say we're not giving a quarter. We're not. There's no surrender on this. Personally, I say I give unconditional support to Israel in this. And they say, well, what about these terrible civilian deaths and so on? And so you can say in the way that I have said, the Israelis have gone to extraordinary lengths to avoid civilian casualties. In the end, there are still thousands of civilian casualties. What do you say about that? I say, I'm on the side of Israel in a war for civilization against barbarism. And I'm not going to allow Hamas's use of civilians as human shields to alter that. And it's very important. I mean, these are very difficult arguments to have with people, but I think it's absolutely crucial we have to take this stand and not give an inch in it. And we shouldn't underestimate what we're up against. It's the kind of anti-Israeli, I mean, obviously the mad Islamist stuff is always a minority. But there is a very powerful wider sentiment that Israel is in the wrong, that we have to counter. I was recently with some of my friends who are here tonight outside a pub. I don't normally stand outside pubs, obviously, but I was standing outside this pub in South London. And these characters turned up, these old lefties, selling a newspaper called The Newsline. And anybody who might, like me, once upon a time been a young lefty, might remember The Newsline was the paper of the Workers' Revolutionary Party. It was funded by Colonel Gaddafi in those days. I don't know who funds it these days, but they're still producing it. And so these two middle-aged blokes came around outside the pub trying to sell their paper. And they were looking for the softest line possible to get in with the punters. So the two things that he said to me and my friends was, support the Newsline, defend the NHS, freedom for Palestine, as if they were completely interchangeable, inarguable sentiments that the entire British public would... No, he picked the wrong table, and we... suggested to him he might do better peddling his wares elsewhere, in so many words. But, I don't think he was entirely wrong about that. That there is a very soft pool of support for Palestine that's challengeable, undoubtedly, because people are just ignorant. Our daughter's friends say, oh, I never thought about that. All of our friends just are on the other side. There's never been a proper argument about it had with people. So we've got to get in there and have that argument if we have a chance. But it's absolutely crucial, and there's no backing out from it.
Thank you. So thank you to both of our speakers. And now we will have some questions from the floor. But hang on, you have to wait a second, because apparently if you don't speak into the microphones, then the 200 and however many people that are watching on YouTube won't hear you. So if you just hang on 1 second, there's a microphone coming round.
Hello, John Jay, introducing myself, ex-scribbler for the Sunday Telegraph and also the Sunday Times. For me, one of the critical questions to which I'd like an answer is, what do we do about the BBC? The Beirut Broadcasting Corporation, the Baghdad Broadcasting Corporation. My mother used to work for the BBC. It's so upsetting to see the widespread anti-Semitism, if it's on the website or the Today programme, where Michal Hussein said that the phrase controlled by Islamists is equivalent to being controlled by Jews. Just think about that. She said that, I complained, and they said I was taking an over-literal interpretation of the words. That is the BBC, Lord Reith, education, entertainment, information. So I'd be very interested to hear what the two speakers have to say about that. What do we do about it?
Great. What I'll do is I'll let you come back now, actually, so that you,
Mick can go first. He
Yeah.
might have some ideas.
rather than taking a load of questions.
I have written 533 letters of complaint to the BBC. I was,
Tell us the story.
you know, sorry, I'm doing my best here. You
Tell
know.
us the story.
Well, we hear every morning. I just don't listen to them now. I just
Yeah.
can't bear it. I wake up, you know, kind of 7:45. There I am, and you know, Michelle Hussein is talking to some clear Iranian mouthpiece, as if this is a kind of viable point of view. I mean, you know, what can you say? We complain and complain. You know, I hesitate to mention the next government because goodness knows if that will happen. I think we will see a big change in politics in the next few years. It's interesting, actually, internationally, because I wouldn't normally perhaps have been Donald Trump's most natural, instinctive fan. But I now find myself thinking, is it good for Israel? Literally every election is like, oh, I think, yeah, you know. And we're going to have the BBC's bête noire, Trump in the White House. We're going to have a massively pro-Israel administration. We're not going to have, my great fear with Kamala Harris was we were going to have, you know, pandering to the progressive left, right? I think this will, look, we've got the Starmer government. We know what their attitude is. We've seen both during the Tory leadership campaign, we saw both Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick absolutely rock solid for Israel, right? You know, I mean, so I think that we are looking, and we've got that with reform as well. So I know it's a bit of a time to hang out for, but I think it will prevail. And I think we could really start seeing some sort of crackdown on these things in terms of the license fee and so on. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think, Mick?
Yeah, I mean, I think the BBC is institutionally anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, and there seems to be. It makes no difference. I mean, Danny Cohen did that brilliant expose of the track record of how many times they are the archetypes of what I was talking about blame Israel first and ask questions later, which is not normally what journalists are supposed to do. It doesn't seem to make any difference. You know, lessons will be learned, and they just carry on. It's just the same thing because it's deeply embedded. It reminds me of my friend Rod Liddell when he worked at the BBC. Said, apart from him, when he was the editor of the Today programme that Alice was talking about. Apart from him, the only people in the building he thought have voted Brexit were the security men and possibly some of the cleaners. And it's pretty much the same kind of school, I think. There are a few Jewish journalists in the BBC who are very concerned about it and feel themselves terribly pressured. But campaign for the withdrawal of the licence fee, that's not going to happen under this government. We should do it. But we should also recognise that the BBC, although it's a media monolith which puts, you know, the left's kind of panic about the Murdoch empire, it's got nothing compared to the BBC's control of the number of media outlets in Britain. But they are not being watched and listened to by increasing numbers of people and by whole generations of people who are getting their news elsewhere. And it's the elsewhere we can at least fight the battle. We can't take over the BBC, but we can fight on social media. We can fight on the podcasts and the blogs and so on, and our own media outlets to have an independent voice, which is where young people are getting their news from. If you can get on TikTok, you're going to reach a whole generations of people. Not that I know anything about TikTok, obviously. You're going to reach a whole generation of people that the BBC are not touching. So that's our hope for the future. Burn the BBC down, but I see there's very little prospect of that under the current arrangements.
And Spike shows what's possible.
Exactly, yeah.
Yes, it does.
It's grown and grown. Gideon.
Thank you. Well, first of all, just quickly to commend Our Fight UK and British Friends of Israel October Declaration on managing to pack out one of the UK's largest Jewish community centres with one of the largest events they'll hold probably all year, with a group of largely non-Jewish jailbirds and threats to public order, which we Jews are thrilled about. My question is this. A lot of what we're seeing now, this sort of topsy-turvy thing within the police and the sort of institutions of law enforcement, a lot of it we blame on people like Sir Mark Rowley and people at the top, but a lot of it seems to be happening at the grassroots. Yeah. If you told me a couple of years ago that we'd be spending a campaign against anti-Semitism, a huge amount of our money defending a non-Jewish Iranian for his sort of reprehensible behaviour stating the law, or Mark or various others, and at the same time having to privately prosecute anti-Semites, whilst the police seem to be able to find endless resources to go after heroes like you, Allison. Why do you think that's happening at the grassroots level of the police and the Crown Prosecution Service? Why is it not just a top-down, but also possibly a bottom-up problem?
It's a good question. I was really shocked not only to have the police come to my house on Remembrance Sunday morning, but then to start getting information that there was anti-Semitism within Essex Police. Telegraph's got 3 credible allegations of someone very senior at a meeting. We've got the direct quote, definitely very, very strongly pro-Palestine. I heard from a Jewish lady who had complained about a post by someone called David Miller, who I think Gideon may know has some form, perhaps, allegedly, in this area. And she sent me the letter she'd got back from Essex Police saying, yes, all very unfortunate, you were offended. But of course, feelings were running very high at the time, as they were when I wrote my tweet, for which they set out the Gold Command terrorist unit to terrorise me into submission. There's a woman who worked in Essex, I think was a hate crime ambassador, if there's such a thing you can imagine, but who said that she had objected to one of her senior officers that something had been overlooked, which was very, very anti-Semitic. And he said to her, "Are you Israeli?" Okay. So this is very, very worrying. But getting back to Gideon's point, I think it's really in the higher echelons, the College of Policing, where all these very woke officers are trained up in this identity politics, and I imagine they do endless Islamophobia courses. They all get promoted on the basis of that from the hate crime incidents. I think the more they can get, so they can report to their Islamophobia, Islamist pressure groups, and then they can say, oh, it's great, we've nabbed 15 people this week, including that horrible journalist for the Telegraph, or, I always thought I'd be in jail for Islamophobia, but, whatever, it was always going to happen. And so I think that on the higher echelons of the police, chief constables and so on, that those are the views of that progressive state. They want to achieve a progressive nirvana, and they are policing for favoured minorities against the majority, and the favoured minorities don't include white people or Jews. That's it. Sorry.
Yeah, I really agree with Alison about that. I think it is a cultural kind of institutional thing in the police and indeed in the state. I wrote a book about free speech nearly 10 years ago called Trigger Warning, in which I coined the phrase policing the tweets rather than the streets.
Ooh.
And that's become kind of, they seem to have read it and kind of taken that on board as the policy, but with a particular focus on pro-Israeli protesters now, which I think is all to do with the way in which, as Allison says, if you want to get on in the police, you've got to learn to talk the talk. That's always been the case. It's just a different language you have to talk now, I think, to be advanced. You have to be part of the DEI and identity politics. And this is the root of so much of the evil that we're up against in our society, is the identitarian politics, which says that because Jews are white, and not only are they white, but they are the most privileged group of whites in many circumstances, it is impossible for them to be victims. Even in our victim culture, Jews can't be victims. They are part of the oppressor system. They are part of the privileged white class, and therefore they must always be in the wrong, and those who are there against are automatically the victims. And I think that is we think of that as being something to do with student politics. Those students who are educated in that, in our terrible excuses for universities, are now running the institutions of our society and our state. And so identitarian politics is right in the middle of this problem. And I think, you often hear, it's not the grassroots coppers, it's their bosses telling them to do it. And these days, I think, I'm not so sure. Some of them seem very ignorant, but some of them, no doubt, still think it's their job to catch criminals. But some of them do think, and those I think particularly the thrusting young coppers who want to get on, this is the road to advancement.
Well, the one who
achievement.
accosted Gideon with what were you accused of looking suspiciously Jewish in a built-up area? Quite openly Jewish. Flagrantly Jewish. I have to say, although I'm still, have been through this very battering, routine, horrible thing, really, which is very unpleasant to be deemed stirring up racial hatred in your own society. But we have had a victory today because the offending tweet a year ago was indeed me kicking off about two-tier policing. Perhaps not the most judicious form of words, not my finest sentence, but anyway, that's what it was about. It was not about hatred. It was saying the police are showing more favour to one than the other. And the Telegraph, of course, has got behind me, said it was absolutely outrageous, and we have fought them tooth and nail. But now we're going to force an apology out of Essex Police and indeed the Commissioner for Police in Essex. So we can, with these small battles, we can, and I am going to. I've said I don't want it just to be about me, because I'm very fortunate. I've had big backers. I've had lots of, I just had Kemi Bade knock on the phone saying she was thrilled. What can we do? What we need to do is we need to stop this absolute nonsense, non-crime hate thing, which is basically just so that they can defend their favoured group. And I think we can do that, and I think we're going to make a big stink. And if I see any more of this, pro-Palestine stuff at the expense of the Jewish community, we're just going to be on them like aren't we?
Absolutely.
You weren't expecting that this evening, were you? Don't give her the bumps as well. Did you have your hand up? Good. Yeah. I was looking for a lady, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, another lady.
I'm kind of a lady. Hi, I'm Louisa Parker. I've come from Leeds, where I've started an R-Fight branch. And we were talking about what's next, weren't we? But I'm thinking about, R-Fight is really important to me. It's kept me going for the whole year. So pleased to have a few non-Jewish colleagues in Leeds that want to form a group with me and do some real kind of activism. But on Tuesdays, we don't fight, we try to convince. And I want to go back to what you said in the introduction about how do we convince people that they should be concerned about this. Now, I have to say, people are concerned about this. The people that I know, my tribe, in the left, in the arts. I mean, I'm now an outcast, I'd probably be good friends with Allison, I don't know. Yeah, nobody's been around to arrest me yet, so that's good, but nobody's speaking to me either.
No.
Now, I spent a couple of decades trying to convince leftists and Labour supporters that they needed ordinary people on their side, and they never used to listen to me. And now I'm in the same position, trying to convince people. So what I want to ask the panel is, what are the most convincing arguments that you've come across that actually seems to change people's minds?
Thank you. Great question.
Good question.
I might take a couple more and then let you.
Yeah.
So these two here. Yeah, wait for the mic. Thanks. Yeah.
So, hi, I'm Amir. I'm a Jew. I don't know. Listen. I'm really interested about listening about the BBC and about how we prevent ourselves getting blocked in Twitter.
Keep it close.
But I think there is a kind of bigger elephant in the room when we look about all of this situation, as an Israeli, by the way. So we ask ourselves, why Hamas attack Israel? Or why Iran attacks Israel? Why Hezbollah attacks Israel? Why there isn't any other democracy in the Middle East like Israel, between the other countries, which are probably not Jewish and not Christian as well. So, and then we look at this country and we look about what's happening here, and we look about, for example, courses for police officers about Islamophobia. I don't know. I can't call it Islamophobia, because phobia is a fear of something which is not real. And I'm telling you, the fear is real. The danger is here. We don't know how to fix this situation at the moment. But I want to know what we are doing because, yes, they're coming for us now. They will come for all of you after us quite quickly and without any doubt. So, I'm really interested to hear about the BBC and again about Twitter, but there is a really fundamental issue here that we must, talk about.
Okay.
And how we solve it.
Okay. So let's take those two questions then. I'll come back to you in a second, yeah? Yeah, I'll come back to you. So should we take those two? The strongest arguments.
Can you tell me what the fundamental problem is that you think that we're avoiding?
What is the
I
elephant?
think there is, in this country...
Sorry.
I think in this country there are forces which are not believing in liberal values.
Yes.
I'm fighting for liberal values in every day in my life as me, all right? I don't do much, by the way. But when I'm speaking to people, when I'm kind of, arguing, this is what I fight for. I fight for this. I fight for the ability to marry my husband. I fight for women to be able to walk without being covered in the street. And I know there are people in this country, I can tell you from a lot of conversations that I have, that don't believe in these values. And they are getting stronger. And this country is very convenient. Let's say it. Okay. This is the problem.
So, should we deal with those? Well, when I say deal with...
Sure. Do you want to go? Do you want me to go?
Well, what the gentleman said, so I don't know if anyone saw the interview, it kind of does matter, the BBC and Twitter, it kind of does matter because these are very culturally important. And on the BBC a few weeks ago, Laura Kuenssberg was interviewing Kemi Badenoch, and she said, you've said that not all cultures are equally valid. And Kemi Badenoch said, yeah, child marriage, absolutely. No, but the fact that a senior BBC presenter was presenting this as a sort of, an unpleasant notion, this is where we've got. It's very difficult. I've written many, many times against the burqa, which no one is ever going to convince me that covering, turning a woman into this sort of black shroud is a celebration of femaleness. And women in this country didn't, suffer and fight for that to be seen on our streets. No, so but we coming back to what Mick's described, we have a liberal intelligentsia which has just become so open-minded, the brains have fallen out, and it's true, isn't it? It's just true. So they will not stand up. They will not stand up and say. I was reminiscing about this many, many years ago. I did teacher training, and I did a period in a primary school observation in West London. And a wonderful little girl I got to know, Hatice, tiny little Muslim girl, pudding basin haircut, really lovely sort of chocolate button eyes. And even then, this is 40 years ago, even then they were saying the little Muslim girls would not be wearing the summer uniform of a gingham dress. They would be wearing a thick roll neck, a tunic, tights and trousers in the summer. Why? Okay, no. Oh, they're not coming on the school trips. Yes, they should. We should have then said, you're here, you're incredibly welcome. All children want to belong. I mean, if you meet little kids like that, they just want to be the same as the other kids, okay? So they're being held back by mainly a patriarchal society which doesn't think young girls should be mixing in our liberal Western society. So that's been a huge problem. We didn't insist. And I walked home once with Hatice because she had to go home. And we got to the door of her flat and I knocked on the door. I can't remember why actually, but I knocked on the door. And a woman came to answer who was Hatice's mother. And she was wearing an iron beak, right? An iron beak. And this woman came completely covered and this iron beak. And I looked at her and I thought, how is this little girl going to become British? Seeing her mum like that. How? It's absolutely terrible. And Mick, you say, I mean, that's just an example. So yeah, failure of integration. We need to have a much more robust attitude and say, everyone, you're welcome, but these are some of the things that are going to happen. And one of the things that's going to happen is we're not going to have schools where children are made to not conform to the uniform, withdraw from classes, where we're not. Just yesterday, a reader sent me a thing saying, very nice primary school, no Christmas. No, now it's all the winter fair. So gradually, the erosion of things that we've celebrated as a society, where everyone's been welcome, and so just adjusting our values or our traditions to fit in with other people rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, Allison. I think there is a major denial about what you were talking about this problem in society. First of all, there's a denial about the extent to which there is a section of our society that rejects Western values. We're always told it's only half a dozen people, right? Actually, some very good polling done. Maybe none of us should believe polls anymore, but there's certain polls which do get talked about, certain polls don't do, interestingly. But some very good polling done earlier this year which demonstrated that 4 out of 10 British Muslims didn't believe that Hamas had committed, they did believe probably that Israel, they didn't believe that Hamas had committed murder and rape on the 7th of October. And there were various other terrible statistics demonstrated. You have, I live in a part of London with a large Muslim population, all friendly, none of them friends, all neighbourly, none of them really neighbours, segregated lives and communities that people live in. So there is a definite problem there. But the real problem is not that these people and the failure of our immigration policies, the abandonment of the idea of integration, the fact that we no longer can say we only live in a multi-ethnic society, which is where we do, and that's fine and good, but we have to live in a multicultural society, which is there's no central values that anybody can unite around. Everybody's culture is equally valued. That's a very, very serious problem. But it isn't just that these people are against liberal values, it is that no one is defending liberal values. The people at the top of our society have abandoned liberal values and have given the ground. Talk about denial of this problem. You may remember, you may not remember, there's a teacher in Yorkshire who received death threats for showing a glass, the
Cartoon of Muhammad.
Cartoon of Muhammad in a discussion about free speech with all kinds of provisos. Didn't have to look at it, didn't have to be there, didn't want to, and so on. He's been in hiding ever since. When was the last time you saw him? When was the last we saw him mentioned or talked about in the national media? It's just forget about that. It's just complete denial about it. A problem. It's all a lovely multicultural experience. None of this stuff ever happened. So the denial and the refusal to stand up and say, no, we think this is what we believe in as a society, I think is the root of the problem. And that, unless we do that, there's no way of dealing with a militant and angry minorities.
Thank you very much. Right, so, no, because there's lots of other hands, I'm afraid. Sorry about that.
We didn't answer this question.
No, I know, but we're going to have to, you're going to have to pick which ones you answer.
All right, okay,
So
all right,
I'm going to get
we'll
some more
answer.
voices in. But can I ask everybody now to be fairly brief with their questions and things? So you've got the...
Hello, is this working? Can you hear?
Yeah, could you please stand
So
up?
you said you were confused,
Could you
Mick.
please stand up?
Yeah, Mick, you said you were confused outside the pub with 2 pints in your hand and a cigar.
You were there. Must have been.
I was a waiter. It's actually quite simple because after the war is over, Hamas will continue to be against Israel or grow against Israel, but Israel will be growing its GDP for its people. So it's an economical situation that you'll see that Israel will go through the stratosphere because at the moment there's a big armaments deal just come into Israel. Saudi Arabia want to do business with Israel. So, it's a really, really difficult situation we've been in. And my son's an IDF soldier myself, so I'm the father. And I just see Israel is an amazing country, and it will grow, and its economy will grow, and its people will be proud again.
Very good. Could you pass it? There's a lady behind. Yeah, thank you.
That's very quick. And following on from what you were saying about people not believing October the 7th happened, the white middle class are a lot to blame for this. As we know, they are behind the BBC as well. All the people I know who used to be friends over the last few years of nonsense, they start on about Palestine, and I then defend by saying, what about the massacre of innocent civilians in peacetime on October the 7th? And they say to me, where's your proof? Where's your proof? It didn't happen. They're changing history. And this is happening everywhere. It's not just Muslim people saying this, because we know throughout history it's been the white people, generally, who have been responsible for the mass anti-Semitism. How can we deal with this? To say to people, we haven't got proof. Obviously, nobody has actual proof unless you're there. So what do you say when you are faced with this?
Although they're not even really looking for proof. I mean, if you look at, say, Francesca Albanese, who Mick referred to earlier, you look at that report that she produced recently, it's newspaper headlines, it's assertions. So they start with the genocide as the headline story, but then as you go in, it's thousands of starving children, but then you go in further, it's some expert has reported that there may be thousands of starving children if they don't get any food. Well, that obviously makes sense. You know, so the whole thing, I'm not sure even reality would, there's something else that needs to be done. Okay, there's going to be too many hands to get in now. That lady there, is that Eve? Yeah.
Oh, here comes the troublemaker.
They say if you want to sort of win a war, you need to know your enemy. And I thought the point at the front here about the issue of Islam was important, because I think that we need to understand that there's a distinction between Islam, the religion, and Islamism. And I think we really don't understand enough about the enemy that we face, which is Islamism. And but I think people can confuse the two. I think it's very, very important not to confuse the two. And whilst I don't believe in Islam, the religion, and I think there's lots of issues that I have with it, it is different, very different from Islamism, which is a modern phenomenon that was started in 1928 in Egypt as a response to the failure of Arab nationalism and other political issues. So that's one of the big enemies that we're facing. And if we confuse the two, then we alienate millions of ordinary Muslims that could be on our side and that have come to this country to escape tyranny in the Middle East because they wanted to live in a democratic society. So we shouldn't just do what's done to Jews and push everybody together, because that's racism. We need to distinguish between, people and politics.
I think, yep, in the middle there. Oh, have a go. Yep. And then if you can pass the microphone to Jonathan there.
Hello. So I've joined Mark and Stop the Hate and many of these counter-protests. And there's a lot of talk about the silent majority. I feel that when we talk about kind of two-tier policing and Keir Starmer, I felt that if there were more people joining us on these protests, they probably would actually put more enforcement on the pro-Pally mob. I'm not so sure there is a silent majority. And I just wondered what your views are on that, because I think there's so much disinformation out there. And I feel that equally we could have a panel talking about all the horrors in Palestine and giving arguments, and people just choose what to believe. So is there a silent majority that we can work on?
Very good question. You didn't give me any choice, did you? Go for it. On the condition that you stand up.
Should be fine if you just talk into it.
Son.
Hello.
Oh, yes, we can hear you.
Hello. Simon Sebag Montefiore and his book Jerusalem. And I find out that Great Britain abstained in the vote of the two-state solution. Now, I think we've got to go back a long way, and I'm so with the lady who talked about making sure that we distinguish between moderate Islam and lunatic, rubbish, ISIS mob type, and the Muslim Brotherhood, who are so dangerous. I was going to say that it would be really marvellous if we could have something positive in a vision, you know, because we're all on the defensive here, because I'm furious. I'm so ashamed of my country not being full square behind the formation of Israel. How dare we have abstained in 1947? I'm absolutely appalled. And I know that all through my life, I'm 81 years old now, and I know jolly well that there's been an undercurrent of anti-Jew sort of. You know, it's not talked about, but it's there. And I know jolly well that the powers that be have been highly conflicted about the state of Israel, about actually Israel having the right to exist. There were people in the British Army who were dead again it. Now, this appalls me. And so what I think we need to do is to create a vision of the future of all our religions. Are the Abrahamic faiths. I think those Abrahamic accords were fantastic, and Donald's greatest gift, hopefully, that something can come of them. But we all believe in the same God. For goodness sakes, we need to make sure that all of us make a pitch for something positive for Jerusalem and the whole of the Holy Land, that it can be a place to be respected, where the values of the very best of the three faiths could actually work together. Now, that is something positive we could do for the future. It doesn't win us the battle now, but at least it gives you an aim of where you're going to, and that's helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. If you could pass it to Jonathan here. Could you pass it?
Oh, people at the back. People at the back.
Oh,
look, people up there. They need to be.
So who's got the other microphone? Do you mind taking it to the back, and then we can only really fit in two. Can you try and be brief, Jonathan?
How come you didn't say that to anybody else?
I know.
Not only did Britain not vote
Could you hold it
for
to
the
you?
establishment of the state of Israel, they sent 100,000 troops to Palestine to stop Jewish fleers from the Holocaust. London put Amir al-Husseini, the pogromist, as the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem to carry out pogroms in 1920, 1929, 1936, in Baghdad in 1941, and collaborated with other allies to ensure his freedom so he could head up the higher Arab organization that led the war to stop the establishment of the State of Israel. What is the issue? October the 7th has announced that Jew hatred and pogroms are part of the social convulsions tied up with the world crisis and march to war. That's where things are heading. And it's not a new thing, because of the specific history of the Jewish people, Jews will always be scapegoated when there is a capitalist crisis. That was what the source of the Holocaust was. Let's not forget the Holocaust. It wasn't carried out by Islamists. The source of the problem is the nature of the capitalist system that we live under. And there will be no solution to Jew hatred until working class people take political power, because working class people is the only class that has no interest in oppression or exploitation of any kind. And all these others...
Okay, thank you,
and
Jonathan.
all these others, and all these...
Jeremy Corbyn, yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, so how come that's the most controversial thing that it's got everybody going, you know? Okay, so we're drawing to the end. So I need, it's a bit, I can't quite see there, but I can, Jan, if you could maybe pick two or three people
up
and
the
then,
top,
and then we're going to have to give our speakers a chance to sum up.
Hello, thank you very much, and especially to all of us at the back here.
We have your word for that.
Yes.
Have we got some British friends of Israel here? Anyone got? Oh, yes. We've got some lovely badges to sell you later.
Not just
I would suggest that...
Everyone can have British friends of Israel.
I would suggest that we've just heard some rose-tinted views about our Muslim cousins. I'm afraid that anti-Semitism is an intrinsic part of Islam, whether you're an Islamist or a Muslim. But what I'd like to know from the panel is what has happened to the silent majority in this country. If we look at the official figures, we've got a population of 65, 66 million people. We have officially 4 million Muslims, although I would say anecdotally there are nearer to 6 million, which is almost 10% of the population. Even if only 20% of those were radicals, what's 20% of 6 million? 1.2 million Islamists. That's a very sizable number of rabid Jew haters and rabid haters of people that celebrate their religion on a Sunday. What are we going to do about it? And has the horse already bolted?
Okay. You did make a big leap there. You said if there's 20%, then there's... So, I mean, that's a big old leap. Okay, have you got a couple more?
There's one in the middle here.
Be super brief and actually ask a question. So the U.S. election has shown a clear repudiation of the woke mind virus and of the left. Can the same thing happen here in the UK, or is it doomed? Thank you. And thank you, both of you, all three of you, for everything that you've done.
Okay. I'm letting you pick another one. Sorry.
Yeah, my question, perhaps following on from the gentleman down there, I was going to ask Mick. I was going to ask Mick a question about trade unionism. A lot of people here might have been shocked over the last year, or maybe not so shocked, about some of the biggest trade unions in this country, at least the upper echelons of them, being very happy to stand and speak at some of these grotesque events, put their name, put their logo to the flyers with some of these Islamofascists. What can those of us who do consider ourselves still part of the old left do to push back against that within the trade unions? Thankfully, mine isn't that bad. Is it fighting internal elections, winning the argument? And where do you see the trajectory of that going in the next few years? Very quick point, if I may, as well. I speak here not as a Jewish person, but as a friend. Mick mentioned about what happened in the Netherlands the other week, which hasn't been touched on since. I feel, and I hope I'm wrong, that that is a sure sign of things that may be to come even here in the UK. Is it perhaps time that Jewish people thought about self-defense in a very serious way, in a physical way? I'm thinking like the 43 group after the Second World War. I hope that I'm wrong. And I'll leave that as a comment. Thanks.
Thank you. And then last word goes to Daniel, who was being hidden by Bob. I had no idea. I thought you weren't here, Daniel, sorry.
Well, I just wanted to say very briefly, those people who think...
Could you hold it closer?
There's no distinction between Islam and Islamism. One thing they should do is look at the Hamas Charter or Hamas Covenant, which you can Google and you can find in English. Because in that, among other things...
Closer.
In the Hamas Charter, you will find, among other things, it blames Jews for the French Revolution. It blames Jews for the First World War. It blames Jews for the Second World War. It talks about the power of the Rothschilds controlling global finance. Now, I'm not an expert in Islam, but I'm pretty sure those things are not in the Quran. So I would suggest it's a much more complicated picture than just blaming Muslims and Islam for the problem.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got a... we were supposed to have finished 10 minutes ago, so I do apologise, but because there were so many questions, I'm going to give the... You've got 1 minute... No, you haven't. Yeah, take a few minutes to pick on any of those arguments, not the people, but the arguments that you want to pick up on, and any final words and thoughts to leave us with.
Okay. Yes, apologies for all the questions that I'm not going to address. I think the horse is very close to having bolted. Someone said, is it too late? You know, that stable door, we've got to get our weight behind it very quickly and heavily. And I do think, I agree entirely that what happened in Amsterdam should be a warning to everybody.
Yeah.
And not only what happened in Amsterdam in terms of the organised Jew hunt, as it was accurately described, that went on the streets of Amsterdam, which British people usually think of as the heart of liberal, tolerant Europe, but the reaction to it and the attempt to minimise it, talk it down, pretend it was something else, talk about fascistic Israeli football fans as having been responsible for provoking it. The attempts by the left and the liberal media and commentators to try and turn it into something that it was, to try and play it down in the way that they would normally exaggerate every hate crime, this one was talked down. That's a real warning sign of where we are. My friend and colleague Brendan O'Neill, who's written a very good book about October the 7th that you should all read, called After the Pogrom, made the point about when the Israelis assassinated the Hezbollah leader, that we were left with that absolutely surreal situation where ordinary Muslims in the capitals of the Middle East were dancing in the streets celebrating it, whilst the Western liberal elites and media were wringing their hands about another Israeli offence against international law. That is the problem that we are up against, is our own societies refuse to stand up for what we're supposed to believe in. That's the thing that we can do something about. Well, they are scared, yeah. They've also they are scared, but it's not just a question of being personally scared. I think that they've abandoned the principles of our society. You always hear that phrase where you heard it after October the 7th. You don't even hear this now, but of course I support Israel's right to defend itself, but, right? Well, of course I support free speech, but. Of course I support democracy, but everything comes with a but now. We live in a spineless world where people do not want to stand up for principles and fight for them. And that's what we've got to rectify.
After the barbaric murder of Sir David Amess, people will remember, I watched in absolute incredulity a debate in the House of Commons where their solution to this absolutely horrific attack was MPs should be a bit nicer to each other, and let's clamp down on online hate. Someone had actually gone and slit the throat of an MP. There was absolutely so. I think they are scared, but I think they need to stop being scared very, very quickly. And we've just seen in the last 48 hours that the Jewish Chronicle has called out this absolutely disgusting. While they're coming around to knock on my door, the police were trying to let off some imam who had been, inciting, I'm sure this is happening in mosques across the country, go and burn the Jews in their homes and so on. And now the police have flipped. And I do think we have to insist, and I think it's worked. They've said, every single time that they refuse. Did you see that those guys who drove through North London with the Propel flags shouting about raping Jewish women? Oh, nothing to see here. These things, this is not allowed to go on. Absolutely not allowed to go on. We have to embarrass them, and I think there is a way forward. Talking about this, everyone's asking about the silent majority. I'm not sure. People like my mum watches the BBC, and then she said, "Oh, I know you do all this stuff pro-Israel, but look at all these poor dead children." We are facing a mountain because they're constantly, whenever we see all again, you think, oh no, here we go. Oh no,
The angel of death.
There's no situation in Lebanon that can't be made worse by the arrival of terrible. But it's hard. I think it can be done. I mean, I know that people trying to get, getting the hostages, relatives of the hostages, publicising the human stories, which is what I try and do, and say, terrible things have happened to these people. Could have been your kids, could well be your kids. We're not really allowed to mention the massacre of little girls in Southport Taylor Swift dance class, are we? Because that's got nothing to do with terrorism. Allegedly, I think the ordinary British people know when they're being told a pack of lies about stuff like that, to be honest, and I think that's part of what was going on. And then the only answer of the elite and the government is to shut them up and imprison them for saying that. That won't hold. They can't do that endlessly. If there are Islamist-inspired attacks, allegedly, the ruling class is going to be in real trouble because the ordinary British person is not going to put up with it. That's what I think. I hope. And so we will eventually have a government which will think, Christ, this is all going to really boil over if we don't clamp down.
Great. Thank you. Mick, you had one more.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of arguments about is there a silent majority, how should we win the arguments, and so on. These are very difficult, and you know more about it than me because you're out there having these arguments. But first of all, one thing I would say is, first of all, there is a hardcore of people that it is not worth arguing with. I don't waste your breath arguing with the hardcore Islamists, right? Just as some kind of intellectual exercise. There are a lot of other people out there who we can influence, but the key thing is, don't worry about what the other side is saying. Raise our own flag. Put our own flag and say, these are the values that we stand for and want to defend: democracy, sovereignty, free speech, and freedom. And we've got to stand and defend them. Make a flag that those people who are looking for an alternative can rally around, and have the arguments out with people. I found it very effective, by the way, to expose, what people actually know about what's going on, like exposing that from the river to the sea, what that actually means as a slogan, as a genocidal invitation to wipe Israel off the face of the earth and to drive the Jews into the Mediterranean. I found that quite a powerful thing for people who just think it's a nice kind of chime to go along with. But basically, you've got to put our flag on the hill, which is why I think our fight and the British Friends of Israel are doing such an important job of putting their flag on the hill as a rallying point for people who are looking for an alternative. That's the starting point. If we don't do that, then we're never going to win the argument. And the one thing that we cannot afford to sacrifice, if we're going to have a chance here, is freedom of speech. And that's the lesson of what happens at Allison. So let's please be careful about who we want to ban. Because you start asking the state, don't ban me, ban them, that's an invitation to them to start drawing lines about acceptance, etc. Obviously, support for terrorism is illegal. Incitement to violence is illegal. There are a lot of other areas where we're just talking about obnoxious, offensive speech. If we want to live in a free society, they have the right to say that, but we have the right to drive them off their arguments off the street by making the case for Western civilization and for Israel as the front line in the fight for democracy and free speech.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for coming. This was our first public meeting jointly, or for both British Friends of Israel and for our fight. And as Mick says, we are trying to put a flag on a hill and trying to make these arguments to more and more people. I think the next event that we would like people to really try and engage with and tell your friends about is on the 8th of December, the campaign against anti-Semitism. Gideon, who spoke earlier, I think he's left now, but his organisation are organising a march in central London against anti-Semitism. And I think it's the kind of thing that we should be going back to our friends, colleagues, maybe even the trade unions, like the guy at the back said, and try and win the arguments that people should be on these marches. And perhaps have a think imaginatively about the kinds of banners that you might take on these marches that would be not simply just against anti-Semitism, but some of the values that Mick and Allison are talking about, and wave the flag. And then in January, it's the Holocaust remembrance, and I think we should also be starting to think now about how we make as much of that as we can, because I think that's one of the slippery slopes that's happening here, is the idea of the Holocaust and genocide being redefined. And you'll see lots of things have happened over the previous years where people have said, let's remember all these other genocides, like the one going on in Gaza at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's obviously very dangerous that this undermines and belittles the Holocaust, the Shoah. And it's the 80th anniversary next year, so January should be a real focus point for us all as well. But other than that, thank you so much for coming. Thank you incredibly, so much to our incredible speakers. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.